imagine waking up tomorrow morning, right? You reach for your phone on the nightstand, and you realize the world you went to sleep in is effectively gone.
Just completely upended overnight.
Yeah, exactly. You scroll through your feed, and the global economy is literally gasping for air. I mean, major international shipping routes, those invisible arteries that keep our lives running, they're just completely abandoned.
Right, the ships are just gone.
And stock markets, from Tokyo to London to New York, they aren't just dipping. They are in sheer freefall panic.
We're talking absolute worst-case scenario stuff.
Right. And all of this, the sudden fuel rationing, the localized power outages, the skyrocketing price of basic groceries, it's all because a 40-day war just redrew the entire geopolitical map of the Middle East.
And then you check the date on the articles.
Exactly. You check the date, and it's April 8, 2026.
It really creates this massive sense of cognitive dissonance, doesn't it?
Oh, totally.
I mean, you're reading a forensic historical breakdown of this global catastrophe, but it hasn't actually happened yet.
It's a trip. But welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today, we are looking at a deeply unsettling, intensely granular scenario.
It really is granular.
Yeah. We're examining this speculative geopolitical text written by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat. It's titled Barak Face, The 2026 Iran War, Anatomy of a 40-Day Strategic Storm. And as we just established, it is written from the perspective of April 8th, 2026.
So it's essentially a simulation, like a war game put to paper.
Right, exactly.
But before we go any further, I think it's vital to establish the parameters for our deep dive today.
Yeah, please do.
We are looking exclusively at a fictional, simulated strategic scenario crafted by the author. I mean, our job here is to impartially analyze the political, military, and economic events exactly as they are described in this specific text.
We're basically looking at the blueprints of a hypothetical fire.
Precisely. We are not taking any sides, politically or morally, regarding the real-world nations involved. We aren't here to debate the ethics of international relations.
Right. Our sole mission is to unpack the author's anatomy of this conflict, right? To understand the strict mechanics of how this simulated 40-day strategic storm ignites, escalates, and fundamentally breaks the global system.
Exactly. And to give you a high-level overview of what those blueprints show, the core thesis of this text is that this 40-day conflict running from late February to early April 2026 was absolutely not your grandfather's war.
Right. No massive ground invasion.
Exactly. Nobody was rolling thousands of tanks across a desert border. Instead, it was this high-intensity air, missile, and cyber campaign.
Which, according to the author, completely exposed the hard limits of modern air power, while simultaneously revealing just, like, the terrifying fragility of our global economy.
It really did.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before the bombs fall, the words have to fail, right?
That's a great way to put it. The geopolitical preamble is essential here. I mean, wars of this magnitude require a massive accumulation of diplomatic friction before they spark.
So where does the text set the stage?
It starts in early February 2026 in Geneva. There are these indirect nuclear talks taking place between the United States and Iran.
And indirect in this context, I mean, that literally means they aren't even sitting in the same room, right?
Exactly. Intermediaries are literally shuffling paper back and forth between hotel suites.
That's so wild to think about. Just guys running down hotel hallways with the fate of the world in a folder.
Yeah, it's very tense. The text notes these talks are being quietly supported by Oman, which is a nation that has historically served as a really vital, discreet mediator in the Gulf.
Right. But despite Oman's help, the talks are basically teetering on the edge of total collapse over 4 highly specific, totally irreconcilable demands.
Yeah, and let's really dig into the mechanics of those demands, because they represent the absolute bedrock of why this simulation goes kinetic.
You really have to understand what these two sides are actually arguing over before the shooting starts.
First on the table is Iran's absolute refusal to accept what are called zero enrichment restrictions.
Okay, break that down for me. What does that mean in practical terms?
So the U.S. and its allies are demanding that Iran have zero domestic capacity to enrich uranium. They essentially want to pour concrete over any potential pathway to a nuclear weapon.
Wow. Okay, so just total zero.
Right. But Iran views domestic enrichment as an inalienable sovereign right. They refuse to zero it out because they view it as a strict prerequisite for their own technological independence.
Which, I mean, you can see why that's a complete gridlock immediately.
Absolutely. And then you have the second point of failure, which is the U.S. and Israeli insistence on curbing Iran's ballistic missile development.
That's an interesting pivot, though, Because it's not just about the nuclear payload anymore, it's about the delivery system.
Exactly. Asking Iran to give up its ballistic missiles, it's basically like asking an island nation to scrap its entire navy.
Right.
It is their absolute primary mechanism for projecting power in the region.
That leads directly into the third dispute, right? The sanctions relief.
Yeah, the financial access. Iran is demanding the release of this massive economic chokehold so they can actually access global markets and their own frozen funds abroad.
They just want the oxygen turned back on for their economy.
Exactly. But the U.S. is stalling. They're hesitant to release massive influxes of capital because of the fourth sticking point.
Which is the proxy militias.
Right. Iran's regional posture and its financial support for proxy militias across the Middle East. We're talking specifically in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Syria.
You know, reading through these 4 points of failure in the text, it totally reminded me of a hostage negotiation where both sides are absolutely convinced they're the police and the other side is the bank robber.
That is a perfect analogy, actually.
Like the U.S. and Israel are looking at Iran saying, put down the weapons, dismantle your military-industrial complex, and come out with your hands up.
Right, and Iran is looking right back at them saying, no, you are holding our economy hostage. We are here to negotiate the release of our bank accounts, and our defense systems are not up for debate.
So why are these demands so totally existential? Like, why would both sides rather risk a massive regional war than just find a middle ground?
Well, the author frames the stakes as inherently incompatible.
Yeah.
I mean, for Israel, Iran's nuclear progress, especially when you combine it with an expanding, highly sophisticated missile arsenal, it isn't viewed as just a political nuisance.
Or like a border dispute.
Right. It is framed as an existential threat, like a literal ticking clock threatening their continued existence.
Which is why the text notes that high-level U.S. and Israeli consultations are escalating in urgency during this period.
Yeah, because Israeli intelligence believes the timeline for Iran achieving a nuclear breakout capability is shrinking to zero. They feel they are out of time.
And from the Iranian perspective, like, what's their existential dread here?
For them, surrendering their missile program and dismantling their proxy network means surrendering their only effective deterrence against foreign invasion.
Or forced regime change, right?
Exactly. If they give up those chips, the leadership believes they will just be systematically dismantled by the West.
So the diplomatic avenues just turn into dead ends. I mean, the board is effectively set.
And the text details that by late February, the physical repositioning of military assets becomes totally undeniable.
Right. The U.S. is moving carrier strike groups into the region. Strategic bombers are forward deployed to Allied bases.
Yeah.
Missile defense assets are spun up.
It's a massive mobilization.
Let's just pause and think about what that actually looks like to the world.
Yeah.
I mean, you have satellite imagery flooding the news, massive accumulations of gray hulls in the water, bombers lining up on tarmacs.
It's impossible to hide.
If you are a civilian listening to this right now, this is the moment you would start feeling the war, weeks before a shot is even fired.
Oh, absolutely. The markets would react instantly.
Yeah. Global shipping insurance rates would theoretically be skyrocketing just based on those satellite photos alone, which subtly pushes up the price of your Amazon packages.
And Tehran sees all of this happening in real time. The text highlights that the Iranian leadership issues explicit public warnings during this buildup.
What are they saying specifically?
They state unequivocally that any kinetic strike on Iranian territory will be answered by hitting regional ports, allied military bases, and global supply arteries.
So they are actively telegraphing their exact counterpunch.
Yes, they are telling Washington and Tel Aviv, if you try to surgically remove our nuclear program, we will blow up the global economy.
Wow. So both sides knew exactly what the economic stakes were. But they pushed forward anyway. Which brings us to the precise moment the simulation erupts.
Operation Epic Fury, or as the Israelis reportedly called their parallel effort in the text, Roaring Lion.
The author provides a timeline that is just chillingly precise. President Donald Trump issues the final operational order at 20:38 UTC on February 27.
And the first wave hits Iranian airspace at 09:45 IRST, that's Iranian Standard Time, on February 28.
Which translates roughly to 1:15 a.m. on the east coast of the United States.
Right, and the sheer scale of this opening salvo is frankly difficult to conceptualize.
Yeah, talk to me about the scale.
The text reports nearly 900 strikes in the opening 12 hours alone.
That is insane. I mean, to put that logistical feat into perspective, coordinating 900 separate simultaneous strikes across an entire nation's airspace.
It's a monumental orchestration of violence.
Yeah. You are coordinating assets, moving at different speeds from different altitudes, launching from totally different domains,
Sea, air, and land all at once.
all designed to impact their targets at roughly the exact same moment to completely overwhelm the defender's capacity to process what is even happening.
Exactly. It's sensory overload on a national scale.
Let's break down the mechanics of those 900 strikes. What are they actually targeting in those first few hours?
The author categorizes the targets with really deliberate precision. They are hitting missile launch sites and deeply buried storage facilities.
Okay.
They are systematically blinding the country by destroying early warning air defense systems and radar nodes.
So you take out their eyes first.
Right. And then they're flattening command and control infrastructure. That's the literal nervous system of the military apparatus.
And obviously the nuclear sites, right?
Naturally, they're striking the nuclear-related sites and research facilities that sparked the conflict in the first place.
Right.
And crucially, they are targeting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
Which means hitting their headquarters, their communications hubs, and leadership compounds situated in and around Tehran.
Yes. And the geography of this is massive. The text lists strikes in Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, Kermanshah, Bushehr, Bandar Abbas.
I mean, that's everywhere, from the capital in the mountainous north to the nuclear facilities in the center of the country, all the way down to the vital naval ports on the southern coast.
And that geographic spread is the core of the strategy. It proves the campaign wasn't simply aiming to destroy hardware or crater a few runways.
What was the goal then?
The goal was to fundamentally fracture coordination. If you simultaneously strike Bandar Abbas in the south and Tehran in the north, you sever the communication lines between the central political leadership and the naval commanders actively controlling the Strait of Hormuz.
Oh, wow. So you isolate the different limbs of the military organisms so they just cannot act in concert?
Exactly. You chop the nervous system into tiny, isolated pieces.
And the hardware they use to execute this. I mean, I want you listening to just visualize the sky filled with this staggering mix of machinery.
It's a terrifying list.
The text breaks down the U.S. contribution.
Yeah.
You have Tomahawk cruise missiles launching from warships and submarines in the pitch dark.
Right.
B-2 Spirit stealth bombers. These are flying wings that are virtually invisible to radar, executing deep penetration strike profiles all the way from Missouri.
Flying halfway across the world just for this.
Then you have the heavy lifters, the B-1 Lancers and B-52s, delivering massive payloads from standoff distances.
Plus the F-35 stealth fighters coordinating all the target data.
FA-18s launching off the carrier decks. MQ-9 Reaper drones loitering high above to pick off whatever vehicle survived the initial blast. And HIMARS launching rapid response regional fires.
And keep in mind, that is strictly the U.S. contribution. The text details that Israel contributed a massive aviation package of roughly 200 fighter jets, deploying air-launched ballistic missiles.
200 jets. That's an incredible amount of air power.
And they were also deploying one-way attack drones inspired by the very Shahed-style designs that Iran utilizes.
Using their own tactics against them.
Exactly. It is this terrifying, synchronized symphony of modern, multi-domain firepower.
Let's pause on the military jargon for a second, though, because you mentioned HIMARS in that massive laundry list of weapons. I've seen videos of them on the news and other conflicts. But how do they fit into an air campaign?
That's an important distinction to make. HIMARS are essentially highly mobile, truck-mounted rocket launch systems.
Okay.
They can fire a pod of GPS-guided rockets and then drive away. The military calls it shoot and scoot before the enemy can trace the trajectory and fire back.
Wait, so they shoot and then immediately move?
Yeah, exactly. In this scenario, they would be used from Allied territory in the region to hit shorter-range targets, adding ground-based artillery saturation to the complex aerial ballet happening above.
Okay, so you have this unimaginable physical destruction. I mean, 900 kinetic strikes turning reinforced concrete into literal dust. But the text also explicitly highlights informational warfare.
Yes, the cyber element.
It mentions hacking media channels and disrupting apps. Now, on the surface, why bother hacking a TV station when you are currently dropping a 2,000-pound bomb on the military headquarters next door?
It seems redundant, right?
Yeah. How does a military hack an entire country's telecom network while simultaneously bombing it?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the physical destruction and the cyber disruption are inextricably linked. They are actively designed to amplify each other.
How so?
Think about the causality. When those kinetic strikes take out a localized power grid or a centralized communications hub, it creates a vacuum.
A silence.
Right. And the cyber element rushes into that exact vacuum. The campaign described in the text involves spoofing cell towers or hijacking broadcast frequencies to create panic and fracture morale.
So you're isolating them physically and cognitively at the exact same time.
Precisely. Imagine you are an Iranian citizen or, even a mid-level military officer. You are jolted awake by the concussive sound of massive explosions.
The sky over your city is literally glowing.
Yeah. Your immediate instinct is to grab your phone to see what is happening, right? To await orders or just to check if your family is alive.
But the state media channels are hijacked.
Exactly. They're suddenly broadcasting deep fakes or messages of regime collapse. Your encrypted messaging apps are failing to connect. The official command networks are either pushing out contradictory spoofed orders or it's just total dead air.
Oh, man. So the objective is cognitive paralysis.
Yes, you want the adversary to feel completely isolated, disorganized, and totally defeated before the sun even comes up.
And that cognitive paralysis ties directly into the single most shocking event reported on that very first night.
A decapitation strike.
Right. The narrative moves from the macro-level destruction of concrete infrastructure to the targeted removal of the central human pillar of the state.
The author reports the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, alongside several members of his family and senior officials in his inner circle during that initial wave of bombings.
This is a monumental pivot point in the simulation. I really want to unpack the philosophy driving this specific tactic. Why do military planners gravitate so heavily toward this idea of decapitation?
Decapitation warfare is built on a very specific, somewhat rigid assumption. It's the belief that authoritarian regimes are fundamentally brittle at their absolute highest level.
Meaning what, exactly?
The theory posits that power, decision-making, and loyalty are so highly centralized in a single figurehead or a tiny inner circle that if you suddenly remove that central pillar, the entire structure beneath it just lacks the autonomy to function.
So planners assume it will simply collapse into infighting, chaos, and total paralysis.
Right. You cut off the head of the snake and the body dies.
But the author of this text pushes back on that theory with incredible force. I mean, there's this powerful, highly evocative quote in the text that fundamentally challenges that mindset.
The quote about states not being statues.
Exactly. The author writes, "But states are not statues. They are organisms."
It's a brilliant framing.
I find that framing so compelling. Because decapitation warfare, in this context, it isn't like cutting the head off a snake at all. It's more like chopping off the top branch of a highly invasive vine in your backyard.
Right, yeah.
You take the clippers, you snip the biggest, most prominent branch, and you walk away thinking, great, I killed it. But you totally didn't. The entire root system is still perfectly intact beneath the soil.
And reacting to what you just did.
Exactly. The trauma of losing that top branch just signals the root system to immediately send out a dozen secondary shoots to compensate. It makes the organism spread wider and become far more aggressive.
That biological metaphor captures the reality of the text perfectly. And it is exactly the mechanism the author describes unfolding in the hours after the strike.
So what happens?
The text explains that when that primary nerve was severed, even a figure as absolutely central as the supreme leader, the surrounding tissues instantly compensated. Within hours of Khamenei's reported death, Iran's secondary leadership mechanisms and the deeply entrenched IRGC command networks moved to stabilize continuity.
Which proves a deeply uncomfortable truth for Western military planners, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Large bureaucracies naturally regenerate.
Yeah, absolutely do.
Because the IRGC isn't just a military branch. I mean, it's not just guys in uniform.
Far from it. The IRGC is a sprawling, deeply embedded economic, political, and military syndicate that touches almost every single aspect of the state.
It's woven into everything.
Right. It has successions and contingencies built into its very DNA. The absolute top tier was vaporized, yes, but the mid-level commanders, the local provincial governors, the regional IRGC heads, they possess the autonomy to adapt and reorganize almost instantly.
But while the bureaucracy adapted and survived, the human cost on the ground was tragically permanent.
It always is.
We have to shift our focus from the sterile tactical success of these precision strikes to the devastating, chaotic human reality happening beneath the flight paths, the civilian catastrophe.
The author makes a profound point in this section of the scenario. Even with the most advanced precision-guided munitions in the world, modern war remains a fundamentally blunt instrument.
Military briefings love to use the term surgical strike, right? Which implies this clean, controlled, almost medical procedure.
But dropping a 500-pound explosive weapon into a densely populated urban environment is never, ever surgical.
The physics of the blast wave alone guarantee that.
Exactly.
And the text highlights specific horrific tragedies to underscore this brutal reality. It details a strike on the Shajara Tayyibeh Girls' School in Minab.
Right.
The school was located geographically close to an IRGC naval facility, and the collateral damage from the strike resulted in the deaths of 170 to 180 schoolgirls.
Just devastating.
The text also outlines the bombing of a sports hall in Lamerd, killing young civilians, alongside widespread catastrophic damage to residential districts that just happened to share a zip code with legitimate military targets.
Which introduces a profound complication regarding how modern wars are perceived globally. If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Well, I have to challenge the entire military lexicon here first. How does a planner sitting in an air-conditioned bunker in Nevada or Tel Aviv justify calling a strike precise when 180 girls are crushed to death in a classroom?
It's horrifying.
It feels like the word precision is actively used to launder the morality of the violence.
You're hitting on the core of the informational war right there. The author is demonstrating how the optics of those shattered classrooms fundamentally hijack the war's narrative instantly.
Because the world sees it immediately.
Right. From a purely cold military technical standpoint, the strike was technically precise. The targeting pod worked perfectly, the laser guidance held, and the bomb hit the exact geographic coordinates of the IRGC building.
But the blacks overpressure collapsed the school next door anyway.
Exactly. The military considers the target destroyed, a total success. But the images of blood-stained corridors and weeping parents spread across global social media networks in real time.
So the moral narrative of the war wasn't being controlled by White House press secretaries or military spokespeople at podiums.
No, it was being written by terrified civilians on the ground armed with smartphones.
And hovering over all of this civilian terror was an even darker, more existential cloud, right? The nuclear shadow.
Yes. This is crucial.
The text points out that the opening strikes intentionally targeted sensitive nuclear-linked research areas. Now, international monitors reported no confirmed radiological release in the immediate aftermath. The containment held.
Right, there was no leak.
But put yourself in the shoes of a family living in Isfahan or Bushehr. You hear the sirens, you feel the earth shake, and you see dust raining down on your neighborhood.
You have absolutely no way of knowing what that dust is.
Exactly. You don't know if it's just pulverized concrete or if you're breathing in radioactive fallout. The psychological torture of that uncertainty is unimaginable.
It acts as a psychological weapon in itself, whether it was intentional or not. But Iran did not just absorb these blows, mourn their leader, and capitulate. The narrative pivots sharply to their reaction.
And their reaction is massive.
The U.S. and Israel fought the opening hours with stealth bombers, invisible cyber ghosts, and precision optics. Iran's response was the exact opposite.
It was a demonstration of brute, visible, terrifying psychological force. The text refers to it as missile storm.
The counterattack.
Right. Knowing they couldn't win a shootout in the sky with F-35s, Iran unleashes hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of attack drones across the Middle East within hours of the opening strikes.
We are talking about a massive, decentralized retaliation aimed directly at Israel and U.S. allied positions in the Gulf.
In Israel, the targets are massive population centers: Haifa, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. And the text notes a deeply alarming shift in tactics here, which is the use of cluster payloads.
Yeah, that's a significant escalation.
For anyone listening who might not be familiar with the mechanics of that, a cluster payload is a warhead that doesn't just detonate on impact.
It's much worse.
It opens up midair and scatters hundreds of smaller bomblets over a massive area, specifically designed to maximize anti-personnel damage.
It's an indiscriminate weapon designed explicitly to increase civilian casualties and completely overwhelm emergency services.
And the retaliatory storm wasn't confined to Israel either.
No, not at all. Across the Persian Gulf, Iran targeted the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which serves as a massive critical hub for U.S. Central Command.
They hit everywhere.
They struck facilities in Kuwait and Bahrain, mixed military and civilian sites in the United Arab Emirates, and vital Saudi logistics hubs.
The contrast in the methods of warfare here is just fascinating. I mean, in a conflict defined by 21st century stealth air power, hypersonic speeds, and cyber hacking, Iran chose to fight with gravity.
Gravity war.
Yeah. They used ballistic arcs, Falling steel. They sent thousands of pieces of metal high into the atmosphere and simply let gravity pull them down onto their enemies at terminal velocity.
It's almost medieval in its brutal simplicity, but it is incredibly effective at terrorizing a population.
It's effective because of the raw psychological impact it has on the listener, on the civilian populations in those targeted cities, and on the broader world watching it unfold.
What Iran proved in those retaliatory hours is that geographic distance is no longer a shield. You can possess the most advanced, invisible F-35s in the world, but you cannot stop gravity once those ballistic missiles enter their terminal phase.
Let's define that for the listener really quickly, the terminal phase.
Right, so a ballistic missile essentially travels in an arc. It boosts up high into the atmosphere or even into space, arcs over, and then begins its descent.
Okay.
That final descent down toward the target is the terminal phase. At that point, the missile is falling at hypersonic speeds, literally miles per second. Intercepting an object moving that fast at that angle is incredibly difficult. Now, the text does note that advanced missile defense systems like Israel's Iron Dome for shorter ranges and the Arrow and David sling systems, or the U.S. Patriot and HAD batteries positioned in the Gulf, they intercepted a massive number of the incoming threats.
But I want to linger on the reality of those interceptions. A FAD, or a Patriot battery, hitting a target isn't a magic trick. The incoming missile doesn't just vanish into thin air.
That is a vital point to understand. When a ballistic missile is successfully intercepted, it is violently blown apart in the sky directly over a populated city.
Right, so you now have hundreds of pounds of jagged, burning metal, toxic rocket fuel, and potentially unexploded ordnance raining down on residential neighborhoods.
Exactly. The text explicitly notes that debris from interceptions, along with partial impacts, still caused widespread death, injury, and massive infrastructure damage.
So interception equals survival, but it absolutely does not equal immunity from the horrors of the attack.
Not at all.
And as terrifying as the physical reality of falling steel is, the most devastating weapon Iran deployed wasn't aimed at a city or military base or an airfield at all.
No, it was aimed at a 21-mile-wide stretch of water.
Which brings us to the strategic crux of the entire simulation. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes. Moving away from the physical casualties of the missile barrages, we look at the systemic, global economic casualties of the conflict. The choking of the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow, vital passage between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Historically, roughly a fifth of the world's total global oil consumption passes through this single strait every single day.
It's massive. Iran understood that they could not defeat the combined might of the U.S. and allied navies in a conventional, head-to-head blue water naval battle.
They just don't have the ships.
Right, but they didn't have to. The text details how Iran effectively closed the strait without needing to sink a massive aircraft carrier.
How did they do it?
They used a combination of declared maritime restrictions, the threat of fast attack craft swarms, pervasive drone activity, sea mines, and the targeted harassment of commercial tankers.
So they didn't have to physically barricade the water with steel?
Exactly. They simply made the actuarial math too dangerous for commercial vessels to even attempt the crossing.
And the global shock wave was instantaneous. Trace that domino effect for me. Like a tanker gets turned around in the Gulf. What does that actually look like for the global economy?
The cascade described in the text is terrifying in its speed. The moment the strait is deemed impassable, shipping traffic simply collapses. Massive commercial tankers refuse to enter the Gulf.
Because the insurance companies won't cover them.
Precisely. So global shipping conglomerates are forced to detour their fleets around the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of Africa.
Which adds, what, weeks of transit time?
Weeks of transit time and burning millions of dollars in extra fuel per trip.
And what happens to the markets while those ships are taking the long way around?
Oil prices surge dramatically overnight. We're talking about energy markets in sheer panic, with Asian countries who rely heavily on Middle Eastern crude suddenly facing imminent fuel rationing.
Insurance costs for maritime shipping globally spike to impossible levels.
And as a direct result of energy and transportation costs doubling or tripling in a matter of days, crushing systemic inflation returns globally.
I really want to focus on this fragility because it completely boggles the mind. Why is the global economy so incredibly brittle that a conflict in one highly specific 21-mile wide stretch of water halfway across the world can literally dictate the price of heating fuel in a village in Africa?
It's absurd, right?
Or force a massive microchip factory in South Korea to just halt production? How did we build a world this vulnerable?
We built it this way because, over the last few decades, the global market actively traded resilience for efficiency.
Okay, unpack that.
The global economy operates on what is called a just-in-time supply chain model.
Aha.
Nobody hoards massive, expensive reserves of oil or microchips or auto parts anymore.
Because storing millions of barrels of oil or maintaining massive warehouses of inventory costs money.
Exactly. Corporations rely on the ships arriving at the port exactly when the factory needs the parts. The Strait of Hormuz, as the author brilliantly conceptualizes it, is not merely a waterway.
It is an artery.
Yes. And when a vital artery is constricted, the whole body suffers ischemia. By closing Hormuz, Iran leveraged this geographical choke point to make the entire world bleed alongside it.
They turn the global economy into a human shield.
That's a great way to put it. They essentially broadcasted a message to Washington, London, and Tokyo. If our country burns, your economies will burn with it.
Which forces the simulation into a grueling, exhausting new phase. The initial shock and awe of the opening 48 hours has passed. The decapitation strikes are over. The initial retaliatory barrages have landed.
Right, the dust settles slightly.
And now, moving through March and into early April, the war settles into a daily, grinding drumbeat of attrition.
The author details a punishing operational tempo here. Daily airstrikes continued unabated, often numbering 50 to 70-plus attacks every single day.
Just relentless.
The U.S. and Israel transitioned from taking out air defenses to methodically hunting down surviving IRGC command nodes, hidden underground missile factories, and vital petrochemical facilities in industrial hubs like Asaluya, Mashar, and Bandar Imam.
They were systematically dismantling ports and power grids, attempting to completely erode the state's physical capacity to function.
It's a war of exhaustion at this point.
But I want to talk about the logistics of surviving that for a month. If you are Israel or Gulf state, you are firing multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles at incoming drones and ballistic threats every single day.
The cost is astronomical.
What happens to a society psychologically when air raid sirens go off multiple times a day for 4 solid weeks?
The psychological toll is matched only by the logistical nightmare. I mean, there is no such thing as an unlimited stockpile of interceptor missiles.
Right, you can't just run to the store and buy more Iron Dome rockets.
Exactly. A Patriot battery only holds so many interceptors before it has to be physically reloaded, assuming the supply chain hasn't been disrupted. The text highlights a heavy, exhausting strain on these missile defense networks.
It becomes a mathematical game of attrition. Can the attackers build and launch cheap drones and missiles faster than the defenders can manufacture and deploy complex, wildly expensive interceptors?
And usually, the cheap drones win the math game over time.
And while that math equation is playing out in the sky, the blowback on the ground isn't just economic. It becomes deeply regional.
Yes, the conflict bleeds over.
The text notes that Lebanon accelerates into its own distinct, brutal theater of the war. Over 1 million civilians are displaced as Israeli military operations expand beyond targeted airstrikes into full-scale ground activity against Hezbollah forces in the south.
The entire region is rapidly unraveling.
Let's look at the grim balance sheet the author provides for early April, roughly 5 weeks into this simulation. The toll is staggering across the board.
It really is. For Iran, we're talking thousands dead, encompassing both military personnel and civilians caught in the crossfire. Widespread rolling power outages.
And their nuclear program.
It's delayed. Crucially, the text notes it is delayed, not permanently eliminated.
And for Israel and the Gulf, what's their balance sheet?
For Israel, dozens killed, a terrifying strain on their defense logistics, and significant residential and infrastructure damage from the sheer volume of the barrages.
In the Gulf states.
Vital energy and port facilities damaged, shaking the foundational pillars of their economy.
It's just sheer exhaustion.
Yeah.
You read this section of the text and you can palpably feel the physical, logistical, and economic fatigue of all the parties involved.
Everyone is bleeding.
The interceptor stockpiles are dwindling. The global markets are in free fall. The world is collectively screaming for this conflict to stop, which sets the stage for a forced, incredibly fragile ceasefire.
Right. Because how does a modern multi-domain war like this actually pause? It certainly doesn't end with a formal surrender ceremony on the deck of a battleship.
No one is signing a treaty with a fancy pen.
Exactly. It ends with an exhausted truce brokered by desperate third parties. The text details this breakdown occurring on April 7th and 8th.
And the brokers who step in are fascinating. The text highlights Pakistan stepping in as the primary mediator, heavily backed by intense, behind-the-scenes diplomatic pressure from China.
It's a very specific dynamic.
Let's explore the mechanics of why Pakistan and China are the ones forcing this issue. Why them?
It comes down to raw self-interest and geography. China is the largest buyer of Iranian oil. Their entire manufacturing sector, their economic engine, cannot survive a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
They need the oil flowing or their factories shut down.
Exactly. Pakistan, meanwhile, shares a long, volatile border with Iran and has deep, complex economic and religious ties to the Gulf states. A regional war directly threatens their internal stability.
So together they possess the leverage to force a provisional 2-week truce starting on April 8.
And the terms of this truce are incredibly basic. It's essentially just a pause button.
What are the exact terms?
Suspension of the active bombing campaigns. Iran agrees to lift the restrictions and reopen Hormuz for safe commercial passage. And there are some weak, vaguely defined commitments to de-escalate.
But what happens next is arguably the most predictable part of the simulation, isn't it? The spin room.
Oh, absolutely.
Because there was no clear, unconditional surrender. Every single leader involved rushed to microphones to claim total victory to their domestic audiences.
The text breaks down these competing narratives beautifully.
I want to analyze these narratives because they show how truth becomes entirely subjective the moment the shooting stops. Let's start with the U.S. perspective. Trump.
Right.
So he is essentially claiming this was a massive, necessary, preemptive house-cleaning operation.
Exactly. Trump's narrative, as described in the text, framed the 40-day campaign as a total, uncompromising defensive necessity.
He claimed victory by stating the strikes successfully prevented an imminent nuclear breakout.
And destroyed the immediate ballistic threats to U.S. forces and Israel. The text notes he even hinted at long-term regime change, viewing the decapitation strike that killed Khamenei as a fatal, unrecoverable blow to the Islamic Republic's foundation.
Okay, then you have Israel's narrative, which aligns somewhat, but has a different existential flavor.
Israeli leadership characterized the entire campaign as preemptive self-defense.
They argue to their populace that Iran's missile saturation capabilities and nuclear trajectory had finally crossed an intolerable existential threshold.
Their spin was that they had successfully pushed that threshold back, buying the nation years, if not decades, of security through overwhelming force.
But here's where my mind breaks a little bit. How on earth does Iran spin getting bombed 50 to 70 times a day, losing their supreme leader, and having their infrastructure dismantled into a victory?
It requires a completely different definition of victory.
Explain that.
The Iranian leadership, which, remember, reorganized and stabilized rapidly after the decapitation strikes, portrayed the initial attacks as a cowardly, unprovoked betrayal during active diplomatic negotiations.
But they framed their mere survival as the ultimate triumph.
Exactly. Their narrative was, we proved we could absorb the most advanced, concentrated kinetic blows the Western world could deliver, decapitation strikes included, and our state did not collapse.
They survived the fire, while simultaneously proving they possess the power to inflict crippling, unacceptable economic costs on the entire globe.
In their eyes, forcing a superpower to accept a ceasefire without achieving regime change is a massive victory.
Which raises an incredibly important question as we look at the totality of this simulation. Did anyone actually win? Or did everyone just lose in vastly different ways?
This raises an important question indeed. The author's conclusion is sobering. The ceasefire was merely an exhausted inhale before another possible storm.
Nobody achieved their maximalist strategic goals.
Right. The U.S. and Israel did not topple the regime or erase the scientific knowledge required to build a nuclear weapon.
And Iran suffered thousands of casualties, massive economic setbacks, and brutal infrastructure degradation.
It was a draw, but a draw written in blood, shattered supply chains, and depleted national treasuries.
Which brings us to the final analysis in the text, zooming out from the 40-day timeline to look at the enduring, frankly terrifying lessons this simulated conflict provides about the future of global warfare.
The author posits a chilling theory here. This 40-day storm is the new, definitive template for modern conflict.
This is what a major regional war looks like in the 21st century.
Exactly. It is rapid, relentless decapitation strikes. It is drone saturation where the sky is filled with cheap, lethal autonomous or semi-autonomous weapons that completely overwhelm multi-million-dollar defense systems.
It is deeply integrated cyber disruption meant to break the psychological resilience of the enemy before the bombs even break their cities.
And it is deep, unrelenting precision bombing. But crucially, it is all done without occupation.
Right. No one tried to roll tanks into Tehran to hold the ground. It was war by remote control and high-altitude delivery.
But alongside that high-tech sanitized template, there are these enduring ancient truths about war that the text passionately highlights.
To take that a step further, air power can shatter a reinforced concrete building, right? A bunker buster can obliterate a subterranean factory. But a bomb struggles immensely to destroy an ideology.
It really does.
You can fire a cruise missile and erase a radar station from the map, but you cannot erase the will of a regime that has spent 40 years building a society designed specifically to survive isolation and siege.
And the great myth of decapitation is completely shattered by this simulation.
Right.
States, the author notes, act like wounded beasts. When they are cornered, when their leadership is struck without warning, they do not meekly surrender and wait for instructions.
They become infinitely more dangerous.
Exactly. They lash out with everything they possess.
I was thinking about how to visualize the Middle East in the context of this specific scenario, especially regarding the global economic fallout.
It's a complex web.
It's like the Middle East is the central fuse box for the entire globe. You don't fight a war in the fuse box. You fight a war with the fuse box.
That's a perfect analogy.
If you decide to throw a punch inside that box, you aren't just hurting the guy you hit. You are violently yanking wires. You are turning off the electricity for 1 billion people in Asia. You are causing rolling blackouts in Europe. And you are freezing supply chains in the Americas.
That is precisely the author's underlying point. The Middle East isn't just a localized theater of military operations. It is a vital, load-bearing pillar of the global system.
You cannot shake the pillar without bringing down the roof on everyone.
No, you can't.
So what does this all mean? If we wrap up everything we've unpacked today from Paramendra Kumar Bhagat's text, the main takeaway for you listening is this. The simulated 2026 Iran war was fought with B-2 stealth bombers, F-35s, and hypersonic missiles. But the true weapons of mass destruction in this conflict were economics, logistics, and geographic choke points.
The source material leaves us with a reality that is very hard to ignore. Modern war is no longer measured by the square miles of territory an army physically captures and holds.
It's measured by degraded capabilities, by shattered global supply chains, and by the destabilization of societies thousands of miles away from the physical blast radius.
Which leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with, building directly on the author's conclusions about the nature of modern conflict.
Go for it.
If infrastructure, energy flow, and international economics are the actual primary battlefields of the 21st century, what does that mean for the civilians' place in future wars?
That's a heavy question.
When our everyday survival, the food on our grocery store shelves, the medicine in our local pharmacies, the fuel in our cars relies entirely on these hyper-efficient but incredibly fragile global networks, doesn't that make every single one of us, even those living an ocean away in a supposedly safe country, a sitting duck on the very front lines of the next conflict?
Because if the global economy is gasping for air, it doesn't matter how far you are from the Strait of Hormuz. You will still feel the suffocation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking closely at the blueprints, and we will see you next time.